Bali was called the Island of the Gods for hundreds of years, thanks to its gorgeous landscapes and fascinating heritage. Bali is one of the most famous islands in the Indonesian archipelago, but it is much more than a beautiful vacation destination. The people of Bali have always been reluctant to come under foreign rule, yet other countries have been interested in controlling Bali for hundreds of years. As waves of invaders pressed in on the island throughout its history, the people used their flexibility to accept enough cultural change to satisfy the new conquerors while still keeping the heart of their culture safe, where it still beats today. Bali longed for freedom for many years, knowing it always came after invaders went home. But the colonial period was difficult for this small island. After passing from the Dutch to the Japanese and then surviving World War II, Bali became part of Indonesia, where it finally achieved some independence as a province of the Republic of Indonesia. This little island is still working through the implications of freedom. By looking at its history, we too can see how Bali's quest for independence is even more impressive than its beauty. How did Bali come under colonial power? Bali resisted European influence for hundreds of years. The Europeans arrived in the area around 1511 when the Portuguese took over Malacca, part of the Malay Peninsula near the Malacca Strait. The age of exploration had begun. The Europeans were determined to control the Maritime Silk Road and weren't afraid to overpower the indigenous people to do it. The Portuguese were the first Europeans to arrive in Bali, and the Dutch soon followed. However, Europeans tended to focus on areas other than Indonesia and Bali until the spice wars began between the Portuguese and the Dutch over the Maluku Spice Islands in eastern Indonesia. Fought between the late 16th century and the mid-17th century, the spice wars eventually led to a Dutch victory and Dutch control of Indonesia until the 20th century. Bali saw little interaction or trade with the Europeans even after the Dutch took over Indonesia. The island did not have the natural resources the Europeans sought, like spices, metals, and silk. The Dutch also decided the people of Bali were problematic because they pushed back against the Dutch trading posts. One established in 1620 to procure animals, food, and women was utterly unsuccessful. This did not save the island from colonialism. Several countries, including Holland, Britain, and France, had East India companies. The Dutch East India Company strongly desired people to work in their colonies globally, so many Indonesian people groups were forced into the slave trade until it was finally abolished around 1860. For most of the age of exploration, Bali was left alone. It could not give explorers material riches, but enslaved people were one of the few highly prized exports from this island. Balinese kings frequently sold political opponents, criminals, orphans, debtors, and widows into slavery. The Dutch valued Balinese enslaved people for their strength and beauty. Enslaved Balinese people were bought with opium, but for years Bali and the Netherlands did not form an official alliance or even trade commitment. Sadly, once colonization became less about companies turning a profit and more about government control, even peaceful Bali fell under its terrible influence, losing its independence. Except for a few years in the 1800s, the Dutch maintained their grip in Indonesia until the mid-1900s. The Dutch began pressing more aggressively into the Indonesian archipelago in the early 1800s. Part of the reason Bali couldn't resist effectively was because the island had multiple kingdoms. As independent entities, they often had their own wars and struggled to work together against outside forces. The only thing that had protected them for so long was their lack of natural resources, and by the 1800s, the Dutch wanted to control the land. In 1843, the Netherlands gained control over the main regency of Bali named Klungkung through a contract between the Balinese and the Dutch East India Company. When they attempted to form agreements with other Balinese kingdoms, the people pushed back, giving the Dutch the excuse they needed to invade. From 1846 to 1849, the Dutch attempted to take the island's northern kingdoms, finally defeating Bulalang and Jembrana in 1849, with the support of other Balinese kingdoms like Bangli. The royal household was so distressed they committed mass ritual suicide called puputan. It quickly became a consistent effect of Dutch conquest, much to Holland's horror. The Dutch battled with the central and southern Balinese kingdoms and tropical diseases, but could not conquer the rest of Bali, causing the wars to stall in 1849. They finally agreed to peace if the kings of Bali decided to rule under Dutch authority. Under Dutch control, northern Bali followed similar colonization patterns across history. The Dutch built roads and other infrastructure, encouraged agriculture, discouraged certain cultural traditions like widow burning, and raised taxes. However, they did not forget their original colonization goal was the entire island of Bali. By the late 1800s, the Dutch were stretching into southern Bali, taking advantage of local wars and conflicts to take over kingdoms and tighten their hold. The southern kingdoms continued to resist. Some of the young princes even used military tactics to fight back. However, by 1906, the Dutch were attacking the final kingdoms, weakening Klungkong, which had served as the leading Balinese kingdom for hundreds of years. Klungkong finally fell to the Dutch in 1908. They attempted to make peace, but the Dutch obviously only wanted control of the opium trade for economic gain. The people of Klungkong and Gelgel rioted, although the Gelgel riot was put down quickly. The Dutch then marched to Klungkong, and a Dutch bullet killed the Raja. On April 28, 1908, the Raja's 6 wives and the palace procession all committed mass ritual suicide, ending Balinese resistance. Bali was now wholly part of the Dutch Empire and had lost its freedom, but the cost had been high. Thousands of people had died during the conflicts, many to Puputan, as the Dutch continued their quest to take the island at any price. Although the Netherlands had a few secondary reasons for wanting to control Bali, they struggled to understand their primary reasons. Regardless, Bali was now another victim of colonization, and the people were left to struggle with their desire to be free once again. How did Bali gain its freedom? The Netherlands established its hold on Bali late in the colonial era and did not hold it for long or very strongly. For the average person, Dutch rule changed little, if anything, about their daily lives. As the global community reacted to Dutch atrocities and the lives lost during the colonization of Bali, the Netherlands shifted gears, using Bali's traditional culture to create tourism. People came to see a different culture, experience new art, and entertain new ideas, although tourism did not see its first mass boom until the 1960s, long after the Dutch had relinquished control of the island. However, the Dutch played an important role in beginning Bali's tourist economy. The Netherlands decided to restart Bali's traditional kingdoms, complete with Rajas, to further promote tourism, and because their political grip had never been secure anyway. After fighting for so long to take the island, the Netherlands decided to help Bali learn self-rule and be ready for independence. By 1929, the Dutch had established their first regent, and about 10 years later, the 8 regents in Bali became Rajas, although the Dutch called them self-governors. They also encouraged religious structures and symbolism, believing they could defend the people from Islamic conversion, a prevalent religion in neighboring countries and islands. Sadly, Dutch plans for Balinese independence were cut short by World War II. The Japanese took the island in 1942 as part of their Great East Asian co-prosperity sphere. Japan was a rising world power determined to have its own colonies and sphere of influence. Because they were much closer to Indonesia and other European colonies in Asia, Japan maintained they should have them and used World War II to force most of the European influencers out of Indonesia. However, the people of Indonesia wanted to be completely free, so when the Japanese pulled out in 1945, Bali declared their independence and even wrote a proclamation. The Dutch refused to give up Bali so quickly. They sent an army and met the Bali resistance fighters at the Battle of Margarana in 1946. The Dutch won a sweeping victory and held on to their colony for a few more years. But the desire for independence reached far beyond Bali. All of Indonesia longed to be free. They struggled with the Dutch in the Indonesia War of Independence until 1949, when they finally agreed to release their colonies and recognize the Republic of Indonesia. The archipelago was now free, and Bali was swept along into this next chapter, free from Dutch or Japanese influence, but still not completely independent. The first leader of the Republic of Indonesia was Sukarno, and he was so revolutionary that his political ideas shifted from democracy to authoritarianism. As Bali shifted and became an Indonesian province, their local kingdoms were disbanded again in favor of a new government better connected to the Republic. As part of the Republic of Indonesia, Bali did not see economic betterment or political improvements. In fact, President Sukarno became Indonesia's dictator in 1959 and was so focused on stopping Western influences, he accidentally caused hyperinflation and social unrest centered around concerns over communism. By 1965, Sukarno realized he was losing control of the government, So he told the people about a group of communists who had killed 8 generals to prevent a military coup. Whether or not the story was true, there was a widespread reaction against anyone suspected of having communist leanings. Historians think about 5% of Bali's population died during this backlash. Sukarno fled Indonesia in 1966, leaving General Suharto to become the next successor. Suharto set up an authoritarian government from which he and his family reaped the most benefits, but he also established long-term economic betterment across the archipelago. He ruled until 1998. The international economic issues in 1997 finally pushed the Indonesian people into revolt and allowed them to remove Suharto from office. They then held their first democratic election in over 40 years and have struggled to correct the previous corruption ever since. Despite being part of an independent country, Bali still longs to be independent without being part of a republic. Bali continues to draw hundreds of thousands of tourists annually, providing a vibrant economy and allowing people to explore Balinese culture. Today, people travel to enjoy Bali's natural landscapes, beaches, and distinct culture. Of course, many of Bali's most impressive delights is its landscape. Even its farmland is connected to its religion, invoking art and spiritual rituals. Bali is facing issues because of over-tourism. Locals believe the land will not be recognizable if the pace of tourism continues without enough state money to invest in environmental protection. Still, tourists come, and they are most interested in Balinese art, both handcrafts and performing pieces. Music and dancing are a foundational part of Bali's culture. They are a part of a child's early education. Some folk dances express religious beliefs and rites of passage, but others are simply for fun. The Balinese people continue to adapt their dances and handcrafts to meet tourist expectations, furthering economic progress and artistic explorations. Despite their attempts to keep up with modern tourism, Bali is fundamentally unchanged. The people want to practice their culture and live on their island in peace, gently holding on to religious beliefs and traditional ways of life that have carried them through numerous outside powers and colonization. Although Indonesia does not fully recognize Bali as an independent country, the Balinese still hold to their independence, claiming the right to live how they feel is best and to call their special island home. How would you like to get a deeper understanding of history, impress your friends, and predict the future more accurately based on past events? If this sounds like something you might be into, then check out the brand new Captivating History Book Club by clicking the first link in the description. To learn more about Bali, check out our book, History of Bali, a captivating guide to Balinese history and the impact this island has had on the history of Indonesia and Southeast Asia. It's available as an ebook, paperback, and audiobook. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and subscribe for more videos like this.